stop and frisk was found to be unconstitutional, and in part because it was ineffective. It did not do what it needed to do. Now, I believe in community policing, and in fact, violent crime is 1/2 of what it was in 1991. Property crime is down 40%. We just don't want to see it creep back up. We've had 25 years of very good cooperation, but there were some problems, some unintended consequences. Too many young African American and Latino men ended up in jail for nonviolent offenses, and it's just a fact that if you're a young African American man and you do the same thing as a young white man, you are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and incarcerated. So we've got to address the systemic racism in our criminal justice system. We cannot just say law and order. We have to say, we have to come forward with a plan that is going to divert.
So we need to address the systemic racism, not only in policing, but also in the courts, in our prisons, in our economy, for example, where African Americans have now approximately 5 cents on the dollar of wealth, African Americans relative to the Caucasian community, 5 cents on the dollar. This is just an unconscionable economic racial disparity with real consequences. Educational disparities as well, in which it's the schools, the public schools in communities of color, poor communities of color, that have been subject to school closures, to privatization, and to charterization, which has been extremely harmful and hurtful to those communities. Across the board, you can look at health, for example, where the average survival of the African American is 7 years less, 7 years taken off the life of an average African American simply for being black, and another 7 years taken off the average African American life when that is compounded by poor education. So we're calling, in fact, for a reparations program to erase the cumulative burden of these disparities, these unconscionable disparities over time, and to actually put us back to being a whole community without these egregious and unconscionable disparities and hardships that have been historically imposed on the African American community.
But when it comes to policing, since it can have literally fatal consequences, I have said in my first budget we would put money into that budget to help us deal with implicit bias by retraining a lot of our police officers. I met with a group of very distinguished, experienced police chiefs a few weeks ago. They admit it's an issue. They've got a lot of concerns. Mental health is one of the biggest concerns because now police are having to handle a lot of really difficult mental health problems on the street. They want support. They want more training. They want more assistance. And I think the federal government could be in a position where we would offer and provide that.
I'd like to respond. Please. First of all, I agree, and a lot of people, even within my own party, want to be...
Absolutely, police need training in de-escalation techniques. Right now, the common technique and philosophy of policing uses what's called broken windows, which is an extremely offensive, confrontational form of policing that has disastrous consequences. So we need to change the culture of policing. We need to also change who gets hired in policing so that we're not just taking people straight out of service in the military and leading them to think that they now become an occupying force in our African American communities. Likewise, we need to stop this militarization of the police. We should not have police loaded up with gear that the military no longer needs. We should not have armored vehicles and tanks and automatic weapons and riot gear as standard police equipment. You don't need a SWAT team in order to deliver a traffic ticket. You know, we need also to be sure that police forces look like their communities as well, so that there is a common culture between them.
500 is like supposed to be good. but we went from 2,200 to 500, and it was continued on by Mayor Bloomberg, and it was terminated by current mayor. But stop and frisk had a tremendous impact on the safety of New York City, tremendous beyond belief. So when you say it has no impact, it really did. It had a very, very big impact.
Well, it's also fair to say, if we're going to talk about mayors, that under the current mayor, crime has continued to drop, including murders. So there is...
You're wrong.
No, I'm not.
Murders are up. All right, you check.
New York has done an excellent job, and I give credit. I give credit across the board, going back to mayors, to police chiefs, because it has worked, and other communities need to come together to do what will work as well. Look, one murder is too many, but it is important that we learn about.
So indeed, the murder rate is, in fact, well down compared to the 1990s, though it has had some recent increases. It is still far below what it used to be. But it's, it's very important to look at also the underlying causes here of community violence. And in a city like Los Angeles, for example, half of the city's budget is actually being used right now for policing. It's like for the United States, half of our budget is being spent on the military right now, which deprives other elements of society of the support that they need. So how about we use some of that money for actually creating jobs programs for youth, for addressing high-risk youth, for ensuring that we have social workers in the schools, for ensuring that we have after-school programs, and the kinds of things, and quality schools, so that young people are not sort of abandoned to a desperate and hopeless future and push down the school-to-prison pipeline. We can prevent this kind of violence. As Martin Luther King said, violence is not simply the absence of peace and security are not simply the absence of violence, they are the presence of justice.
That's okay. But I will tell you, I've been all over, and I've met some of the greatest people I'll ever meet within these communities, and they are very, very upset with what their politicians have told them and what their politicians have done.
I think Donald just criticized me for preparing for this debate. And yes, I did. And you know what else I prepared for? I prepared to be president. And I think that's a good thing.
Mr. Trump, for 5 years, you perpetuated a false claim that the nation's first black president was not a natural-born citizen. You questioned his legitimacy. In the last couple of weeks, you acknowledge what most Americans have accepted for years. The president was born in the United States. Can you tell us what took you so long?
I'll tell you just very simple to say. Sidney Blumenthal works for the campaign and very close friend of Secretary Clinton. And her campaign manager, Patty Doyle.
It's really, what can I say, telling that this is a subject of conversation here in the debate. Donald Trump's obsession with this idea, this mythology that Barack Obama was not born in the United States, how much of concern is this really to the American people? The American people need jobs, we need good wages, we need a national living wage standard of at least $15 an hour, we need health care as a human right, we need to end the war on drugs and ensure that, that we are not throwing hundreds of thousands of young people into prison for using a substance, marijuana, which is far safer than alcohol and tobacco, which are perfectly legal. We need to empty our jails of the people who have been wrongly incarcerated for the use of a substance which is essentially not harmful relative to other things. So we've got a lot that's important to talk about. Talking about Donald Trump's obsession with Barack Obama's place of birth is not worthy of our time.
I got him to produce the birth certificate, and I think I did a good job. Secretary Clinton also fought it. I mean, now everybody in mainstream is going to say, oh, that's not true. Look, it's true. Sidney Blumenthal sent a reporter. You just have to take a look at CNN, the last week, the interview with your former